That's the reality for Ukraine. There won't be a negotiated settlement where Ukraine gets to say, this is what we want, this is what we don't want. Ukraine will have to surrender completely, unconditionally, and then leave it up to the Russians to decide how to move forward. First of all, the United States bombed Iran, and so they were part of that conflict. I don't think the United States is going to bomb Russia. Trump is not a direct party to the conflict. And what is the United States going to do? Provide $100 more billion? Russia's already shown that they can defeat this. There literally isn't a tool the United States can put on the table that changes the outcome, the trajectory that we're on right now. So I don't see the United States being able to do anything to put pressure on Russia. What the United States could do is put pressure on Ukraine and on NATO to bring this conflict to an end on terms acceptable to Russia. But that would require the United States to stand up to Ukraine and to Europe, and the resentment that then exists amongst this class when Putin stood on his feet and said, no, we refuse to be exploited. The Russian reset that Barack Obama undertook, I think in 2009, was not about resetting relations. It was regime change. It was about keeping Vladimir Putin out of power. Putin, just so people realize, constitutionally could have 2 consecutive terms, but the Constitution didn't say what happens if he gaps a term and then the clock resets. And so he swapped out with Dmitry Medvedev, who was prime minister and now became president, and Putin became prime minister. And the goal of the reset was to keep Medvedev in office and keep Putin out of office. That's the regime change they wanted, because they felt that Medvedev was more open to reforms and more open to keeping the U.S. and the West entrenched in Russia. It failed miserably, and Putin came back. And if you notice, one of the first things Putin did when he became president the third time was to ban Western NGOs and all these vectors into Russian society that the West was trying to exploit under midterm as president. But let's look at Dmitry Medvedev. Here's a man who the West said we can do business with because he's not as anti-Western as Putin, that he's somebody who has a different approach. Today, he's a rabid dog. Read his tweets. From that point on, Israel created a whole different approach to intelligence to eliminate the conceptia. They created a position called the Doubting Thomas, a very senior colonel, and all assessments that would be produced that would make their way up to senior decision-making had to go through the Doubting Thomas. And if the Doubting Thomas asked a question or asked for clarification, it had to be addressed to his satisfaction before it could go up. No senior leader would read an assessment that hadn't gone through the Doubting Thomas. And so this helped create a situation, for instance, where Israel in 1994 made a decision to move away from a decision that had been made in 1991 to assassinate Saddam Hussein, and instead work with weapons inspectors to seek to reduce the threat from Iraq by eliminating weapons of mass destruction under United Nations supervision. Israel was able to make this shift because they weren't married to a conception. They started to go to fact-based analysis. And this worked through the gay, and I can't remember who replaced him. I met him several times, but I can't remember his name right now. Went on to be a very senior Israeli chief of staff, I believe. But he was the head of Amman in the end when I left, was a guy named Amos Gilad. And if neither Ukraine nor Europe were willing to make the changes that the United States was demanding, then the United States would have to move forward aggressively against both Israel and Europe. I don't see Trump doing that. You saw Vladimir Putin's, again, his praise of Donald Trump and the tough campaign, the tough situation Trump finds himself in. I think that's done on purpose to stroke Trump's ego. But the reality is Russia will not yield on its main strategic objectives, and then Trump will be left holding an empty bag, boxed into a corner of his own making. And the question is, what does he do? How does he proceed? I think Russia is fully committed to winning this war on the battlefield. And if circumstances change and you can get the United States to comply and you can get Ukraine to make the changes necessary to have a government capable of doing that which is required of it before there can be peace, then there will be peace. But I think Russia is on a track to take Odessa, take Kharkov. They're already capturing villages in Dnipropetrovsk. They're going to liberate. I believe they will make a move in Zaporizhzhia. At some point in time, they will make an effort to regain the right bank of Sumy. I just think you're seeing Russian success across the battlefield, and Ukraine not being able to do anything to resolve that. I always say the way this war ends is, of course, through a negotiation, but it's not the kind of negotiation the Ukrainians envision. It's a negotiation taken straight from the meeting between General Krebs and Chuikov, head of the 62nd Army in Stalingrad. I'm just saying things that we'll never know, because it's the same way that the West screwed up in Russia. The best way to bring down Vladimir Putin wasn't to go to war against Vladimir Putin, but was to take advantage of the level to which the West had infiltrated Russia in the 1990s and continue to keep that door open and try to outcompete for values and things like that. But we did them the greatest favor by sanctioning them. Russia shut the door, and now Russia's totally solidified its position. They're not going to let the West back in. We've made that mistake with Iran. The West will not be allowed back in. This is it. And I think the Iranian regime is very resilient, and can withstand this. They'll definitely outlast Trump. I believe that the idea that the Iranian regime is going to collapse because of anything Donald Trump has done. The worst Donald Trump can do is get America involved in a long-term conflict with Iran. But that will create political problems, be devastating to the economy, etc. If they want to play the wait and see game, sanctions, things of that nature, it'll outlast Trump. And remember, we have to recognize that the United States is a power in transition right now, away from being the global hegemon to being one of many multipolar. We're seeing the rise of Russia and China and their influence. He has turned on the West. He is not sympathetic, a fan of the West at all, because he's been used by the West. Literally, he was used. He was lied to by Barack Obama, straight up lied about New START and ballistic missile treaties and defenses and NATO expansion, because they viewed him as weak. In the West, they don't respect Zarif. They view him as weak. They view him as culpable, pliable, exploitable. And once Zarif realizes that's how the West treats him and viewed him and everybody else of his ilk, they're not going to go crawling to the West saying, oh, I want to be part of you. They're going to, because they're Iranian patriots. And they're going to say, okay, then the hell with you. And you'll see they'll become even more hardline than the hardliners, because they know the truth. They have experienced the letdown. And I think that's what's going to happen in Iran. I don't think there's going to be this class of pro-Western people working with the West to bring down Iranian society from within. I think it's just the opposite. People who wanted to work with the West now being awakened to the reality of the West, and they'll rally around the theocracy and the regime, but more importantly, they'll rally around the Iranian people and the nation of Iran. And that's the way I see this going. And if this is what he's projecting, then you know how he feels about the court system here in the United States. So it's embarrassing. There's no other word to put it. It's embarrassing what he's doing. Trump has repeatedly criticized Putin and the Russian side for not being willing to make compromises or changes. And this is being exploited by Ukraine and the West to pour cold water on what was a blooming relationship between the United States and Russia. It doesn't matter what personality you attach to U.S. policy on Ukraine, whether it be Witkoff or Kellogg or anybody else, until we recognize the reality of the inevitability of the Russian military victory and devise policies that are designed to be built around that reality, we're going to be disappointed. And you see the increasing levels of frustration on the part of the president when he speaks about this issue and about Vladimir Putin and Putin's reticence to cave into the United States. So Trump announced the mineral deal with the rare earth minerals and all that. Russia just took over the second largest lithium mine in the Donbass and is on track to take over the vast majority of the territory that would contain minerals that are part of this rare earth mineral agreement between the United States and Russia. That has to be frustrating for President Trump. He went from pouring everything into Israel, now saying maybe we'll find a couple patriots for Ukraine after all. But he's just all over the map. And the Russians, I think, while they will continue to keep the door open, or if this will become a series of bilateral agreements and understandings that will lead to the sustainability of Iran's ability to continue resistance. We'll see. But I think there's a recognition that the status quo in terms of how the SCO or BRICS functions is no longer acceptable, that there's going to have to be a new approach taken, or else Iran can be split away and isolated, ultimately brought down. All of these things are human foibles that are vulnerabilities that are exploited by intelligence services for blackmail, for greed, etc. And Iran has shown that it is susceptible to this as well. The Mossad and CIA have preyed upon, Iran's need for and use of foreign workers, and exploited the pipeline that's gone in to infiltrate people into Iran. There are people in the Iranian society that, for whatever reason, have fallen under the control of the Mossad and the CIA, and they can exploit the lapses in patriotism, I guess you could call it. But that doesn't mean that Iran is failing or that it's a weak society ready to collapse. In fact, I think, as you said, the evidence shows that Iran is coming together even stronger. The other thing that's different is that, unlike Iraq, Iran hasn't lost a war. If anybody thinks Iran lost this 12-day war, they aren't taking a look. You mentioned this map of this places struck. Israel today won't allow anybody to truly investigate what happened at the sites that were struck by Iran. I guess the Channel 13 in Israel is talking about massive damage and massive casualties. I don't know if that's true. It would be difficult for Israel to hide that many deaths. I believe that there would have to be, under the Jewish faith, funerals within a certain period of time. So even more, there's just a difference here, that Iran is a nation that's not going to bend the knee, is not going to yield. They haven't been defeated. And I think that there's certain expectations from the Trump administration, from the Israeli government, that aren't going to be met. Understand this too, Trump has a little more than 3 years left. It took over a decade, as I said, to get rid of Saddam after defeating him in the Gulf War. It took more than 2 decades to get rid of Bashar al-Assad. And this is after a major civil war or foreign-induced civil conflict that almost defeated him. The Russians had to intervene in 2015 to save him. Iran hasn't been defeated. In fact, Iran has punched back very hard against Israel, and Iran still has the ability to intimidate the United States. If you don't think what happened at Al Udeid Air Base wasn't an act of Iranian intimidation, meaning that the United States was purposely trying to avoid major retaliation. Never once did Iraq have that kind of leverage over the United States. Never once did Syria have that kind of leverage over the United States. Iran continues to enjoy that leverage over the United States, and to an extent, Israel. Israel's not yearning to once again become a target of Iran's ballistic missiles. And Amos Gilad was more of an ideologue, and he's the one who, away from the Doubting Thomas, and reintroduced the Concepcion. Under Amos Gilad, Israel walked away from the fact-based assertions and assessments that it made in 1998 that Iraq was largely disarmed and posed no threat, to, by 2001, saying Iraq had reconstituted its weapons of mass destruction program, and they had to be invaded so Saddam could be eliminated. Again, they went back to saying Saddam has to go. The Concepcion was back, and from that moment on, Israeli intelligence became horrifically politicized. And so now what you have is a situation where Israeli intelligence has bought into a model called the Nasrallah model. That is, if we just bomb them and kill their leadership, and then we attack the intermediate, senior and intermediate layers of leadership, you'll get a collapse, is what they think they saw with Hezbollah. And so it's the Nasrallah model that was applied on day one of this conflict. They admit it now. They tried to kill. They tried to kill him the first night, and they were hunting for him throughout. They just couldn't get eyes on target, but they did kill senior and intermediate level leadership. This was their goal. Their conception is that if they can eliminate this leadership, the system will collapse from within. The Assembly of Experts is constitutionally required to have a list of candidates available to replace the supreme leader. So the idea that you're going to kill...
They have 3 to 5 people waiting for that.
Yeah. Correct. They've got a list. The system works in Iraq. It's in Iran. It's not a perfect system. No system is. But this is a system that functions and has functioned successfully for many decades now. This isn't a young dictatorship or something of that nature. This is a system that has gone through the test of time, trials and tribulations. It's been stress tested before. So we have seen a declining participation rate in the national elections, and that is something that worries the supreme leadership. But I would imagine that if you had an election soon, that you would have high participation rates because people are starting to realize how important it is to be sovereign, how weakened Iran becomes when they look to outside powers, how they cannot trust the outside powers. The fatal mistake of the West has been to allow itself to be denigrated inside Iran. To me, the fatal weakness of Iran was this desire to be part of the West, this desire to belong with the West. And the West has never given Iran a chance to be a part. Trump has this new mantra: you get more with honey than you do with vinegar. He's made this comment several times now, which implies that there's just a lot of game going on right now, a lot of posturing. And so it seems to me that he's trying to butter people up at certain times. Other times he tries to sour the relationship, but it's all about posturing. It's all about a game. So he does it. He makes this transition so often. Just look at tariffs, how he's just gone back and forth. You get dizzy just looking at 500. We're going to back down. We're going to go to 500. We're going to back down. What are you going to do? So I have to wonder about his approach to Netanyahu. Is this a well thought out approach, or is this just Trump knee jerking his way through a difficult period of time? He changes his mind so often that either he stands for nothing or you can't trust him, that he has made a decision, but he's going to seek to manipulate people. And if your opponent, when he interacts with you, is only about manipulating you, how can you trust anything your opponent says? So again, this undermines the credibility of the United States when it comes to negotiations. I think there's a growing recognition that the United States operates on a geopolitical level using the divide and conquer principles. So I think what we see right now is a master plan that's been embraced by both Israel and the United States that's focused on regime change, using the Iranian nuclear program as a justification for this regime change. But it's the American approach to regime change is long-term. Look at the Iraq. It took a decade or more to get rid of Saddam Hussein from 1990 to 2003. Syria was a multi-generational, 20-plus year program of regime change. Iran has been under sanctions for some time now. This Israeli-U.S. attack has set Iran's nuclear program back. Hasn't eliminated it, though, which I think was by intent, because now it's what I call the inspection trap. It's the same way that the United States trapped Iraq with weapons of mass destruction, trapped Syria with chemical weapons. Even though Syria gave up its chemical weapons in 2014, 2015, under OPCW inspections, the United States and the West continue to make allegations of Syria cheating, holding on. And right now you see the same play being done. The IAEA has to be allowed back in. Iran won't, and that's deliberate. This was a deliberate setup by the IAEA to make themselves unwanted in Iran. What happens when you don't have inspectors on the ground in an incompletely destroyed or not destroyed at all nuclear program? It allows people to say, oh, they're pursuing a nuclear weapons program. We have to keep the sanctions in place.